Now, in today's lesson, guys, our focus will be on manufacturing, and we are going to revise the production cost statement together with the notes for direct material cost, direct labor cost, and factory overheads. Now, because this is obviously revision and we're trying our best to help you prepare for your exams that you're going to be writing shortly, it's very, very important that we quickly recap on some basics that you should be familiar with. Okay, so what do I want to recap on? Now remember, earlier this year when I discussed manufacturing, I mentioned, let's assume this is our premises. The bulk of our premises is obviously the factory, and this is where production takes place. So I want you guys to think of a factory. Obviously you're thinking of machinery, you're thinking of factory workers, and you're thinking of the product being manufactured. Right, then we've got a little office somewhere in the back, and that's where all the admin takes place. And obviously the warehouse where the selling and distribution is going to take place. Okay, now why is this so important? Why is Mahesh emphasizing on this before starting with a question? Because we often find that when we test the production cost statement, students tend to forget that the focus is on the factory, only on the factory. In other words, what are the expenses incurred in the making or manufacturing of a product? Now remember, we spoke about this earlier on, direct material cost. Okay, so obviously the material used to make the product, the physical material. So for example, if we are making t-shirts, the actual material could be buttons, the zips, the thread or whatever, that is your direct material cost. Then we obviously need labor, and here we refer specific to direct labor cost. So the factory workers who physically make the product or handle the machinery, that would refer to as direct labor cost. So the wages that they receive, the additional contributions in the form of pension, UIF, medical aid, the additional contributions will also form part of direct labor cost. And then we have other factory expenses which we call factory overheads. So this refers to all your indirect costs that are incurred in the factory. So for example, insurance that you pay for the factory, right? Your machinery is going to depreciate over time. The water and electricity, right? You could have indirect labor where you're paying the factory supervisor, the person that cleans the factory, and so on. So remember, these costs, as I mentioned, happens in the factory itself. And this is what you need to remember. So when you are drawing up the production cost statement, ask yourself, is this happening in the factory? If the answer is yes, then it will go into your production cost statement. Now, what happens to the costs incurred in the office and the various costs incurred in sales and distribution? Remember, we still keep a record of these expenses. So for example, you've got a secretary that answers the telephone. You've got stationery that is used in the office. We're still going to keep a record of this expense, and this will be used when we are calculating our net profit for the year. Okay, so remember guys, what happens in the factory? Cost of production. However, what happens in the office and selling and distribution will help us calculate our net profit. Okay, right, so let's now begin. So the question that I've chosen comes from a past prelim exam. Can't really remember which prelim exam, and obviously it's based on manufacturing. So let's quickly go through the information. We're not going to go through the info in detail, but obviously we're going to come back to the information as we answer the questions. Right, so information A is my balances on the 1st of March 2018. Right, so immediately 1st of March 2018, this would be the beginning of the financial year. Okay, so I'm given a list of balances. Then B, summary of transactions for the year ended 28th of Feb 2019. Okay, so again, I'm just looking through the information, not really reading this in detail. Right, and then I've got information C, my inventory according to a physical stock taking on the 28th of Feb 2019. In other words, these would be my closing balances at the end of the financial year. Okay, right, so that's the information given to me. Right, what do I now need to complete? So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to look at the production cost statement. And while doing the production cost statement, we are also going to complete direct material cost note, right? Then we've got a note for direct labor cost, or where we're going to show our calculations. And then finally, factory overhead cost. We're going to also show this in a note form. Right, so let's begin. Okay, so we're going to start off with our direct material costs. So immediately I've got to now go to my first calculation. So remember, direct material cost, here I'm trying to calculate how much of direct material was used in the production process. So remember, for the entire year, I would buy materials, but I am interested in, at the end of the year, how much was used, okay, because that is my expense. Right, so direct material cost, we are going to start off with opening balance or opening stock. So at the beginning of the financial year, let's go back to our information. My raw material stock at the beginning of the year, an amount of 58,200, and I'm going to take that through to my note. So 58,200. Okay. To my opening stock, I am then going to add net purchases. Right. Now, what do we mean by net purchases? Here, I'm going to include all my cash and credit purchases of raw materials during the year, as well as taking into account any returns. So remember, if you returned any raw materials, that needs to be subtracted from what you purchased. If there was any theft of raw materials, any loss of raw materials, you would also have to take this into account. So I want you guys to please remember this. Right, so net purchases, let's go back to our information, and now we're looking at obviously our transactions for the year. Right, so from the information given, raw materials to the value of 590,000 Rand were purchased during the year, and the cost of transporting these raw materials amounted to 9,000 Rand. Right, if I scroll down, okay, there's no additional information about me returning any raw materials. So the net purchases in this case is the 590,000. I don't have to adjust this figure. But remember guys, if you did have to adjust, show your calculations in brackets. So 590,000 is my purchases of raw materials. Okay. Right, on the next line, what else increases the value of your raw materials? Any carriage or transport cost that you would have paid. So carriage on purchases And here we're referring to your raw materials that you purchased. What was the transport cost paid for bringing these items to the factory? So still looking at the same information, the cost of transporting these raw materials amounted to 9,000 Rand. Okay, so simple, straightforward, we're going to take through the 9,000. Right, as you can see guys, not difficult. Now remember, if you had to import raw materials, you had to obviously buy this from a foreign country or overseas, you would then have to pay import duties. So in the event of you coming across import duties, please remember to add this to your direct material cost. Okay. Right, so let's now get our calculator out and let's look at the value of our raw materials. So I just want to quickly move that so that you guys can see the screen. So we've got 58,200 plus my net purchases 590,000 plus 9,000. Okay, and that gives me an amount of 657,200. So 657,200, and that is how much of raw materials I have available. Okay, now you don't have to fill that in. I'm just filling it in as an explanation. So that is how much I have available for the year, the value of my raw materials. Right, my balance at the end of the year. So remember, whatever I ended up not using at the end of the year, I'm going to now subtract my closing balance. So let's go back to our information, and the very last bit of information given in C. So let's find that quickly. Right, so here I'm told inventory according to a physical stock taking on the 28th of Feb 2019, raw material stock 96,100, and then very, very important, this needs to be corrected. Okay, so what are they referring to? So if we look at the information above, on the 28th of Feb, a calculation error occurred during the stock taking of raw material stock where 7,000 articles or 7,000 items were recorded at 5 Rand instead of 50 cents. This needs to be corrected. Okay, so remember guys, whenever you have a correction of error, always understand what is the error. Remember, if you don't know what the error was, what the mistake was, how do you go about correcting it? You're not going to be able to. So always understand, okay, that's the mistake that I made. This is how I correct the mistake or the error. Okay, so let's understand our error. So as we're counting our stock, so we're busy counting, there's 7,000 items. So I'm just going to I need a bit of space here. So we've got obviously 7,000 items, right? So remember, I'm busy counting. 7,000 items were recorded at 5 Rand, right? Instead of recording the 7,000 items at 50 cents. Okay, so immediately here's the error, right? I obviously overvalued the 7,000 units of stock or raw materials. Right, so let's get our calculator out quickly. I think it's 35,000, but I'm not going to take a chance. It's quite late in the evening and sometimes my brain might just switch off. So 7,000 times 5 and it should be 35,000. Okay, so remember we valued the stock at 35,000 and that's where we made a mistake. This stock should have been valued at 7,000 times 50 cents. So it should have been valued at 3,500. So that is the correct valuation. Right, so in this total, remember that is the total value of our closing stock, 96,100. there is an amount of 35,000 that should not be there. Okay, so one way of doing it is minus 35,000 plus 3,500, or you can simply take the difference. Okay, I overvalued by an amount of, so if I quickly subtract 35,000, let's just move that a bit. Okay, I think we should be able to remember. So I've got 35,000 minus 3,500. So I overvalued the stock by 31,500. So like I said, two ways of doing this. You can either minus the error plus 3,500, or you can simply say 96,100 minus 31,500. Okay, you're going to get the same answer. Right, so let's show this calculation in our actual note itself. So let's just go there. So remember, they want you to show your calculation in brackets. So 96,100, and you can choose minus 35,000 plus 3,500, or those of you that prefer 96,100 minus the value that it was overstated by 31,500. Okay, right, remember guys, it's or, you don't have to show both. Right, so let's get the calculator out again and let's calculate the correct value of our closing stock. So 96,100 minus the 31,500, and that is giving us an amount of 64,600. So let's fill that in, 64,600. Okay, right, and then finally we can now calculate our direct material cost. In other words, what was used for the financial year. So remember, this amount is what was available. This is what we did not use. So obviously the difference gives us our raw material expense for the year. Okay, so just going to move that. Right, so we've got 657,200 minus 64,600, and that gives us an amount of 592,600. So 592,600, and we can obviously now fill that into our production cost statement. Direct material cost 592,600. Okay. Now remember guys, the reason why I'm not showing any calculations in brackets is because I already did the note. But in the event of them not asking you to do the note, please show your calculations in brackets. Okay.